The following account is based on a true crime. The setting, including the country and the names of the people involved, have been changed to protect privacy. In 1974, an inmate in the Miami-Dade Juvenile Detention Center named Ezra Levine was found hanging in his cell. The official report ruled it a suicide, a tragic end to a troubled life. But the true story of his fate wasn't revealed until the following confession was recorded by a former guard, Michael Davis, after he was diagnosed with dementia in 2023. The following is a dramatization of that recording.
I've carried this secret with me for over 50 years. It's a burden that's weighed heavily on my conscience. But now, before I cave completely to this bastard of a disease, I want to unburden myself of the truth while I still can. It all started back in the early 70s when I was working as a guard in a juvenile detention center in the Miami area. I was young, only 23 years old, so only a few years older than most of the inmates. It was pretty easy most of the time, with only the occasional scuffle or issues typical of a facility where testosterone-charged teenagers are caged up. Easy that is, until one inmate, a young man named Ezra Levine, was transferred in from another facility. He was only to be with us for the 4 months until he turned 18, when he would be transferred to San Quentin, where he would serve out another 10 years as an adult for vehicular manslaughter. He was pretty unassuming, quiet, and a little intense, but on the slender side and almost zero trouble. He seemed to take an interest in me, maybe because I wasn't too much older than him. I don't have any other explanation. He'd go out of his way to talk to me, but as per the handbook, I always pushed back and remained aloof. He didn't seem to like that at all. I soon found out he had a sharp mind and a way with words that could really get under your skin. It started with little things, like him always seeming to be watching me when I was on duty. It progressed to snide little comments, things that sounded petty, like sharing his opinion that he thought I was gay with other inmates. I ignored it, but I gotta tell you, it really bugged me, so much so that I'd go home and complain to my wife about it. She'd rationalize it and make me feel better, but the next day he'd say or do something to trigger me again. Things got really crazy when he started a riot in his block of cells. Well, that wasn't the official cause. The official cause was a fight in the mess room that got out of hand, but one of those in the fight just happened to be his cellmate. I'd seen Ezra whispering in his ear and staring right at me just before the fight. I knew he started the whole thing just by talking the other inmates into it. After we'd calmed things down and instigated lockdown, I was doing a 10 p.m. run along the left wing to make sure they were bedded down and quiet. I stopped in front of his cell and found him standing calmly in the middle of it, muttering over and over. He didn't respond when I told him to get in his cot. I was reluctant to go in. His cellmate was in the infirmary, and to be honest, he was creeping me out. I decided to leave well enough alone and was about to move on when I caught what he was muttering. It was my home address. Enraged, I unlocked the door and got in his face. "How did you get that address?" I yelled. He suddenly stopped and smiled at me. "Sorry, Officer Davis, I don't know what you're talking about." I roughed him up a little, and he just smiled the whole time, pleading ignorance. Frustrated, I got out of there, but it had put a real fear into me. How did he get my home address? Did one of the other guards give it to him? What else did he know? It got worse after that. Over the next few weeks, there were more incidents, more ways that he got under my skin. He'd make comments about my past, hinting at things he couldn't possibly know. The final straw came when he passed by me on the way to the rec room. He was muttering again, but loud enough so I'd hear. He was reciting my wife's name, turning it into a twisted little rhyme. Sarah, fair and tall, loves her husband most of all, but secrets, he does keep in the darkness buried deep. I remember the chill that ran down my spine when I heard those words. The thought of Ezra knowing her name, of him focusing his twisted obsession on her, was more than I could bear. What's more, I did have a secret that Sarah didn't know. Something stupid I did in my early teens with a group of friends, but no charges had been laid and the records of it had been expunged. It wouldn't kill our relationship if it did come out, but it would certainly be uncomfortable. I decided the best course of action would be to request a transfer out of that cell block, away from the poisonous influence of Ezra Levine. That afternoon, though, an hour before my shift ended, Sarah called me at work, her voice shaking with fear. She told me that she had seen a man in a dark van parked outside our house, watching her as she brought in groceries from the car. Being a brave soul, after she was done, she stomped right up to the driver's window and asked if she could help him. He put the window down and asked me if I was concerned about my husband's secret. "What is he talking about, Michael?" I asked him who he was, and he just told me to ask you about your secret before driving off. I knew in that moment that it was something ordered by Ezra. More of his twisted games. I decided to ask to do overtime so I could confront him that night. The boss didn't bat an eye when I volunteered for 4 hours overtime. They were short-staffed. I waited until curfew and then did my rounds, stopping outside his cell again. He was there, standing right in the middle of the room again, facing the door as if he was expecting me. I opened the door and walked up to him. I remember the smirk on his face when I asked him about the man in the van, the way his dark eyes lit up gleefully at my torment. "Maybe it was just a concerned citizen," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or maybe it was someone who knows when pretty wives are home, all alone in a cold bed." That was the moment I decided to kill him. I waited until late that night, when most of the inmates were asleep and the other guards were busy with paperwork. I slipped into his cell, my heart pounding in my chest. He was waiting for me, sitting calmly on his bunk with that same smirk on his face. "I knew you'd come," he said. "You're so predictable." I didn't say a word. I just went over to him and calmly wrapped my hands around his throat and squeezed. He didn't fight it. It was like he had planned it and knew exactly what I would do. That smile never left his damn face, even as I felt the life drain out of him. When it was over, I staged the scene to look like a suicide, like he had hung himself with his bed sheets. The investigation was cursory at best. No one questioned the suicide of a troubled youth with a history of violence. No one looked too closely at the bruises on his neck or the terror in his lifeless eyes. I thought that would be the end of it, that I could move on with my life and put the nightmare behind me. But the memory of what I did has haunted me every day since. We never saw the van again, but I ended up confessing about the incident from my youth to Sarah. She could see something was eating at me and assumed it was my long-held secret, totally unaware that I now had a new secret, one 1,000 times worse than the one I revealed to her. I've often wondered what drove him to fixate on me, on my family. Was it just a game to him, a way to amuse himself? Or was there something deeper, some darkness in him that recognized the darkness in me? I'll never know for sure. But what I do know is that I crossed a line that night, a line that I can never uncross. I took a life, not in the heat of the moment, but in a premeditated act of cold-blooded murder. In my darkest moments, I wonder if I played right into his hands and gave him exactly what he wanted, Either way, the guilt of what I did has been a constant companion, a shadow that has followed me through the decades. I've tried to be a good man, a good husband and father, but always in the back of my mind, there is the knowledge of the terrible thing I did, the life I took in a moment of fear and anger. That's about it. I offer this confession, not for absolution. I know I don't deserve that, but for understanding perhaps and a chance to unburden myself of the weight of my sins. May God have mercy on my soul.
If you're enjoying the audio stories on Shadow Bites, please like, subscribe, and share. It's the best way to help out the channel so we can bring you more content like this.